Who was Art Tatum? Let's just say, Art Tatum was the greatest jazz piano player this world has ever seen. I'll even go one better and state that a case can be made that he was the single greatest instrumentalist in any musical genre that the world has ever seen. Tatum possessed total command and mastery over his instrument in a manner that transcended instruments and genres. He played with the precision and grace of a concert pianist, wrapped up with the improvisational genius of a jazz, stride and swing pianist, coupled with the harmonic sense of a musical scholar and the ability to instantaneously translate his thoughts to flawless performance on the keyboard. And this was usually accomplished at tempos that made your head spin. He was perhaps the greatest pianist you never heard of. There had never before been anyone like Art Tatum. Tatum's playing was unworldly, unreal, because his standard was so high, says Dick Hyman, a Florida-based pianist and composer. Tatum's harmonies to begin with were beyond what anybody was doing at the time, really beyond what anybody's done since, Hyman says. People who hear Tatum on a record for the first time often think they are listening to two piano players. He became a phenomenon in New York. It wasn't unusual to look up and see the classical pianist Vladimir Horowitz or the composer George Gershwin sitting in the audience in awe. Fittingly, his strongest support comes from one of his early influences, Fats Waller. One time in 1938, Tatum dropped in to hear Waller play at a club. By way of introduction, Waller told the audience, "I just play the piano, but God is in the house tonight." Art Tatum was among the most extraordinary of all jazz musicians, a pianist with wondrous technique who could not only play ridiculously fast with both hands, but was 30 years ahead of his time, able to play stride, swing, and boogie-woogie with speed and complexity. Tatum's boundless imagination kept his improvisations filled with fresh ideas that put him way ahead of his contemporaries. Although Tatum was not known as a composer, his versions of popular numbers were so original, they bordered on sounding as if they were newly composed. Perhaps the greatest tribute to the excellence of Art Tatum lies in the opinions of his peers. He has influenced many musicians, including Bud Powell, Herbie Hancock, and even non-pianists such as Charlie Parker and John Coltrane. When Oscar Peterson first heard him play, he thought it was two people playing, and he considered Tatum the best jazz instrumentalist of all time. During an interview in 1962, Oscar Peterson was asked, "Is there one musician you regard as the greatest?" Peterson replied, "Musically speaking, Art Tatum was and is my musical god, and I feel honored to remain one of his humbly devoted disciples." A legend has it that classical pianist Vladimir Horowitz was so awed by Tatum's wizardry that it brought him to tears. Jimmy Rolls said, "Most of the stuff he played was clear over my head. There was too much going on. Both hands were impossible to believe. You couldn't pick out what he was doing because his fingers were so smooth and soft. And the way he did it was like camouflage." Count Basie called him the eighth wonder of the world. Dave Brubeck said, "I think there's less chance of another Tatum turning up than another Mozart." The elegant pianist Teddy Wilson observed, "Maybe this will explain Art Tatum. If you put a piano in a room, just a bare piano, then you get all the finest jazz pianists in the world and let them play in the presence of Art Tatum. Then let Art Tatum play. Everyone there will sound like an amateur." A vocalist, Tony Bennett, incorporated aspects of Tatum into his singing. "I'd listen to his records almost daily and try to phrase like him. I just take his phrasing and sing it that way." Other musicians expressed amazed bewilderment at performing with Tatum. Tatum's solo piano recordings are his greatest legacy. He was not a composer, and his repertoire was drawn mainly from the American Standard Songbook. He used his remarkable memory and overall musical genius to create a library of piano masterpieces. Since Tatum was a perfectionist, he was never satisfied with the level of his playing and kept developing his technique until the end. Tatum's technique was marked by a calm, physical demeanor and efficiency. He did not indulge in physical or facial expression. The effortless gliding of his hands over difficult passages puzzled most who witnessed this phenomenon. Even when playing difficult songs at high velocity, it appeared that his fingers hardly moved. He had an effortless way of playing. It was deceptive. He didn't have that much motion at the piano. He didn't make a big show of moving around and waving his hands, and going through all sorts of physical gyrations to produce the music that he produced. There had to be intense concentration there, but you couldn't tell by just looking at him play. Tatum was born in Toledo, Ohio, on October 13, 1909. His mother, Mildred, was a domestic worker. His father, Arthur Tatum Sr., had steady employment as a mechanic. By almost all available reports, the Tatums were a solid and church-going family. Accounts vary on whether Tatum's parents played any musical instruments, but it is likely that he was exposed at an early age to church music. He also began the piano at a young age, playing by ear and aided by an excellent memory and sense of pitch. He was born blind in one eye and had very limited vision in the other. A number of surgical procedures improved his eye condition to a degree, but some of the benefits were reversed when he was assaulted in 1930 at age 20. Tatum gained some formal piano training at the Toledo School of Music, but was largely self-taught. Although influenced a bit by Fats Waller and the semi-classical pianists of the 1920s, there is really no explanation for where Tatum gained his inspiration and ideas from. He first played professionally in Toledo in the mid-20s and had a radio show during 1929 to 1930. He left Toledo in 1932 and had residencies as a solo pianist at clubs in major urban centers, including New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. In that decade, he settled into a pattern he followed for most of his career: paid performances followed by long after-hours playing, all accompanied by large amounts of alcohol. He was said to be more spontaneous and creative in such venues, and although the drinking did not hinder his playing, it did damage his health. In 1932, Tatum traveled with singer Adelaide Hall to New York and made his recording debut accompanying Hall. But for those who had never heard him in person, it was his solos of 1933, including Tiger Rag, that announced the arrival of a truly major talent. After his arrival in New York, Tatum participated in a contest at a bar in Harlem with the established piano masters, James P. Johnson, Fats Waller, and Willie Smith. Tatum played his arrangements of Tea for Two and Tiger Rag. Reminiscing about Tatum's debut, Johnson said, "When Tatum played Tea for Two that night, I guess that was the first time I ever heard it really played." In the 1940s, Tatum led a commercially successful trio for a short time and began playing in more formal jazz concert settings, including at Norman Granz produced jazz at the Philharmonic events. His popularity diminished towards the end of the decade, likely due in large part to the advent of bebop, a musical style he did not embrace. In 1941, Tatum recorded 2 sessions for Decca Records with singer Big Joe Turner, the first of which included Wee Wee Baby Blues, which attained national popularity. 2 years later, Tatum won Esquire magazine's first jazz popularity poll. Although only a small amount of film showing Tatum playing exists today, several minutes of professionally shot footage can be found in Martin Scorsese's documentary The Blues. He also appeared on television on The Spike Jones Show. to promote the imminent release of The Genius of Art Tatum. His solo performance of Yesterdays on the show has survived as a video recording. He never attained the level of recognition granted to other esteemed figures in the realm of jazz: Armstrong, Ellington, Parker, Davis. There's no Tatum songbook because he rarely composed. In fact, it's said he was so original that he recomposed every song he ever played. His mastery of the piano was so advanced that very few could copy him. And yet his genius is remembered in small but significant ways. A few years ago, a young MIT grad student invented a term that's now in common usage in the field of musicology: the Tatum. By 1956, Tatum's health had deteriorated due to advanced uremia. He was too sick to continue touring, so he returned to his home in Los Angeles. Musicians visited him on November 4th, and other pianists played for him as he lay in bed. Tatum died the next day at Queen of Angels Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 47. This is Alexander from One Track Jazz. Before you go, please take a moment to donate to this channel so I can continue to bring you this great content. Thank you in advance, and thanks for listening.